All right, I'm here with Colleen Cutcliffe. She is the CEO and co-founder of Pendulum. She also has more than 15 years of experience leading and managing biology teams in academia, pharmaceuticals, and biotech. Colleen, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
I'm super excited to get into things with you. I have an affinity for metabolic health, and you and your company are doing some really exciting things. If I were to just tell the audience the punchline here, for me, it's you make a product, a probiotic that lowers blood glucose, which in essence is going to lower metabolic disease, diabetes, pre-diabetes, all the things that have been greatly affected by the United States, or even in the pandemic we saw in the last 2 years. And so it's mind blowing to me. It's like, how is that even possible? But so I'm curious though, how did you get started with this? Was this always, have you always had this affinity with gut bacteria or metabolic health? Like, how did Pendulum get started, and kind of what were the early stages? What did that look like?
Yeah, no, I didn't know anything actually about probiotics before I started this company. Really, what intrigued me was this new science called microbiome, where people were using DNA sequencing to look at what are all the bacteria in your gut. And as I started learning more about this science, I came to understand that even though probiotics and yogurts have been on the shelves for decades and decades, there actually hasn't been a new ingredient or a new probiotic introduced to the world in over 50 years. All the so-called
Wow.
new strains are really just iterations of the strains that are already out there. And what this microbiome science and DNA sequencing enabled us to do as a community was to identify entirely new strains that might be helping us with our health. And I just thought that was such a big opportunity in a space where people are investing a lot of money in probiotics and trying to be healthier, and just not being able to understand what's the difference between all these probiotics. If you've ever stood in the in a grocery store and looked at these shelves and shelves of probiotics and thought to yourself, how am I supposed to pick? You're not alone. Everybody's wondering what to pick. And the fact is, the truth is that people don't know is that all those boxes kind of have the same thing inside of them. So we were excited to kind of create new things for people to be able to select from.
Yeah, okay, that is great. So, and just thinking about that, if I were to ask you, then what's wrong with the probiotic industry in general? Would that be the answer? Is they've never changed, they've never iterated, and they're all the same?
I think that's right. I think there's been incredible marketing innovation, and you feel like you're getting something new and innovative, but when you dig into the science of it, it's really just the same old stuff. And that's why you could try one probiotic and try another probiotic and not really be able to tell a difference.
Even when, for example, someone goes in the store and it's like, well, this one has 15,000 million CFU and this one only has 5 million. Because I always think as Americans, we always think, well, more is better, so I should get the 15 million. But you're saying still, yeah, it's not really going to make a difference.
Yeah, I think it's not about how much stuff is in there, but what is your probiotic doing for you? And I think that, as I said, that's marketing innovation, just saying like more is better, more is better. And the truth is, why is more better? Is more actually better? I mean, are more drugs better? I think many of us would argue not really. And so I think that, in the probiotic space, they've been cramming this CFU count down our throats. And what we really should be asking is, well, why am I taking this? What's it actually doing for me?
Yeah, and then also, can you just speak on, because as a health coach, something that when I always think about probiotics in general, because people always ask me, oh, I should take these for my gut health, because that's the assumption, right? And I'm like, well, we none of them really actually even make it into the colon or past the small intestine, right, to even do anything. And then there's some studies, I guess, think to suggest that, well, there might be at least a transitory effect. But can you speak on the integrity of actually reaching the colon and why that might matter?
Yeah, I think it's a great point. There are a lot of kind of fly-by-nighters in the space, and they're not really being regulated. And so the idea of truth in a bottle is something that the probiotics and supplements industry in general has to battle. And that's why you have these certain players that emerge as kind of the top tier brands, simply because what's in their pill is what they say is in their pill. And I think that that's the bar that we're talking about here. Like, are you actually giving me what you say you're giving me? And so we looked at kind of these higher branded things. One of the things that differentiates them is literally the capsule that the product is in. And so many of us kind of think about, hey, how do I get the cheapest pill? How do I pay the least amount per pill? And the fact is that you might want to be paying a little bit more per pill because there is this thing called an enteric coating. And if your pill is enteric coated, that means that it has this coating on it that gets it through the stomach acid and actually into your colon and into the gut microbiome. And if it doesn't have this enteric coating, the whole thing's just dissolving in your stomach acid, and that's the end of the story. And so that's a really important question to understand. Well, what is even the capsule that my powder is in?
Yeah, yeah. Okay. You've got this amazing probiotic that lowers blood glucose. Like I mentioned, it lowers blood glucose by 32%. And these are double-blind clinical trials. It lowers A1C levels, which is a glucose measurement of like 3 months over time, by 0.6%. That's incredible. How is this possible?
Well, science a lot of times is like putting together a puzzle, and we had multiple pieces to this puzzle, and it was kind of like that final piece that you put in, you're like, oh my gosh, it's a giraffe. And so the pieces that we had were, we know that a high fiber diet is really good for you. We all know we're supposed to be eating lots of fruits and vegetables. Fiber is one of the only ingredients that if you have enough of it, you can actually make claims around health on products. And so we know fiber is really good for us. Then we also know that a bunch of fibers are metabolized by our gut microbiome. Like we can't even metabolize them with our own genes. They have to be metabolized by our gut microbiome. And then we knew that when fiber gets metabolized into this small molecule called butyrate, that can stimulate a bunch of a variety of health benefits, but one of which is increasing GLP-1. And then the other last piece of the puzzle is we knew that GLP-1 can help you with insulin and glucose tolerance. So you had all the pieces. Fiber is really good for you. The microbiome, which is this black box, can convert it into butyrate, which stimulates GLP-1, which helps you with insulin and glucose tolerance. And that black box in there, that microbiome part, was really where we came in and said, okay, we're going to apply DNA sequencing technologies, and we're going to identify what are those strains that are doing that metabolism. And when we found those strains, and we looked at their genetic structure, and we looked at what they could do in the lab, and we looked at what they could do in preclinical trials, they could do this metabolism of fiber into butyrate. And that's how we knew that there's a chance that these things will help people improve their insulin glucose tolerance. And by the way, what we also found, and this isn't just us, but people around the world have found that if you have diabetes or pre-diabetes or even obesity, you're basically on this path of, losing your metabolic health, you start to be depleted or entirely missing these strains that do this metabolism. And so what happens over
Wow.
time is that people are losing these strains, and now the fiber you're eating is literally going right through you because you're not getting all of the benefits of this entire pathway. And all we're doing is we're giving you back the microbes that do this metabolism. We're just giving you that last piece in the puzzle.
So it sounds like too, there's more to just calories in, calories out.
Absolutely. I think that diet and exercise have been sort of the two big pillars of metabolic health. And everybody has, looked to their right and said, what about my buddy who appears to eat or drink whatever they want to, and yet they seem to be skinnier than me? Like we're going on all the same diets, and yet we're not having the same metabolic outcomes. And
I
I
just
think,
have a slow metabolism, right? You hear that all the
yes,
time.
that's right. I just have a slow metabolism. And what scientists have discovered is that there's this third pillar that nobody knew about before. Yes, there's diet, and yes, there's exercise, but there's also your gut microbiome. Everything you eat first goes to your gut and gets metabolized there. So if you have a deficient gut microbiome, that is literally the underpinnings of a slow metabolism.
Yeah, I love that. A couple of other things I was just thinking about when I was thinking about your product and my evolution as a holistic health coach and studying under various naturopaths and functional medicine. I was originally kind of taught to, if someone has like candida overgrowth or something like that, or H. pylori, for example, I was taught, you're going to go in there with herbals and you're going to kill these things. And then we're going to, after we kill them and we take them out, then we're going to bring in like the populated with the good bacteria. And now after being around experts like yourself and others and learning and from other functional medicine doctors, they're saying, Joel, we don't really want to, we're not going to go in there and kill this bacteria. The problem is that bacteria is overgrown and it's causing problems. All we want to do is just find the balance again. I'm just curious, and I know we're not going to talk about maybe candida and stuff, but when you're with your research in the gut bacteria, do you almost think about that is similar too is that you're not going in there with some of these maybe probiotic strains and killing anything. It's that you're finding that homeostasis or bringing back in the balance so that there's that communication signal to the gut, brain, and so forth.
Yeah, I think all of these tools are important in terms of maintaining that homeostasis. I think about it like, I've got a garden in my backyard. Many of us have gardens and yards. And, when a weed sprouts up, there are different ways to handle that. There is the, maybe try to do a targeted killing of that weed. Some people take antibiotics, which is basically like taking bleach to your whole yard and be like, a weed, I got to kill everything here.
Yeah.
And then there's well, let me plant things that are going to, and some of the things you plant are actually weeds, right? But let me plant things in order to keep the unwanted weeds from sprouting up in my yard. And I think when we think about our microbiome, it's very much like a garden where you're constantly planting new things, seeding new things, removing things that you don't want. And it is this constant balance. And if we're not paying attention to our garden, what can happen over time is, these maybe you have like this great vegetable garden. Over time, it seems to be getting fewer and fewer and fewer. And if you're not paying attention to that, all of a sudden one day you've got none left. And I think for a lot of people, that's what they find themselves in. And that's the moment where they come talk to someone like you. And it's pretty far gone at that point. And so I'm curious, when you think about kind of by the time people come to you, how to help them, where do you start? Is it diet, exercise, or microbiome?
Actually, to be honest, Colleen, none of those.
Oh,
I
none.
start here.
Okay.
I start here with the mind because I think and most people when I meet them and we talk about weight loss specifically, they've tried everything. They've done diet, they've done exercise, and I'm like, yeah, well, why has none of it stuck? And I always find that there's emotional issues. There's always some emotional issue or baggage or trauma that happened. And then the second thing is, I think the mindset. People always come to me. It's about consistency and commitment. They don't tell me it's the bad exercise or they don't exercise enough or they have bad nutritional habits, which of course that's that too, but it's always about consistency and commitment. So I always start here, but then if I were to further answer your question, usually for me, I do a lot of detox and work with like the liver and kind of open up those drainage pathways. And just some simple, and that comes with some simple nutritional practices. Once we start to get some of those small wins and the body starts to come in balance, then I'll start looking at, okay, like rebalancing the gut microbiome.
Yeah, and I think that it makes a ton of sense to start with the mind. And I think probably one of the most fascinating things about the microbiome that's become discovered is that this gut-brain connection. And I think many of us kind of intuitively know, we have these phrases that have been around for all time, like, oh, it's a gut feeling or my gut instinct and things like that. But what we're realizing now is that the gut can actually generate neurotransmitters that go straight to your brain. And one of the strains that we've been working with that we've really brought to market is called Akkermansia. And it is a putative GABA producer, meaning that if you are low in it, you are deficient in your GABA production. And many people know that GABA plays a really important role in stress and anxiety, namely reducing them. And so in a lot of ways, these systems are all, and I'm telling you something you already know, all these systems are connected with each other. And so by kind of tackling your gut, you're also potentially also helping some of the mind challenges that all of us face.
So huge. And I had Dr. Stephanie Seneff on the podcast a while back. We were talking about glyphosate and how Roundup and how it's just killing. It does so many bad things. But one of the things that she shared is the correlation between autism and the introduction of glyphosate. And glyphosate destroys the gut microbiome. Now, we can't say that it's the only reason for an uptick in autism, but it's really interesting. And so I think to your point, if you don't have the right strains, like you said, there might be issues with the brain, the mind, right?
Yeah, that's sort of a really new field of discovery. But even in autism, they've looked at kids kind of in the same household and compared, if you have a child with autism and a child without, they've compared their microbiomes, and they have definitely seen that kids with autism have different gut microbiomes than their siblings that don't. And so, and many parents have, reported that changing diet can actually reduce symptoms of autism. And when you change your diet, one of the most important things you're changing is your microbiome. And so I think there's a lot of really interesting opportunity to go after things that we traditionally thought of as neuro diseases and starting to target, really a more holistic system than just going after the brain.
Yeah. You just brought up an interesting point too, because I wanted to ask, okay, I don't have a weight loss issue or a weight problem or a metabolic issue. can I still take your probiotic? I mean, and I just think about what you just talked about with the brain. Or I have two young boys. I mean, maybe they could benefit from that. They don't have weight issues.
Yeah, first I'll start by saying that I'm on the product, my 70-year-old mother's on the product, my 15-year-old daughter is on the product, and my husband is on the product. And so that's just a lead into what I think is really important, which is that as we age, our metabolic health, and you don't need a doctor or any blood work to tell you this. Everybody knows our metabolisms slow down as we age. And so as you age, your metabolic health does start to decline. In fact, one of the number one indicators of your biological age is how well your body metabolizes sugars. And so I think that the important thing is, because your microbiome is so pivotal to how you metabolize sugars, keeping it healthy is important. And so even if you currently are not depleted in these strains, and even if right now it feels like, oh, I've got a great metabolism, this is more of a keep those strains there. Like we said about the garden, you don't just kind of plant something, you're like, wow, everything's looking great, why would I touch my garden? No, every season you're out there doing all the things to keep that garden fresh and to keep those vegetables, growing every season. And that's what I think about the microbiome too. You may have great strains in there and be happy with them, but if you're not caring for them and replenishing them, that isn't going to last forever.
Yeah. Also, something that you mentioned earlier is you mentioned that that specific strain, the acro I can't say it, the acromancia. I'm gonna guess
Nancy, there you got it. Yeah.
acromancia. Yeah, you said that it helps. It's like a GLP agonist. Now, the only time I've heard of that is with one of the everyone's looking at this weight loss peptide called semaglutide, because it's a GLP agonist, and so it helps with satiety in cravings. And they saw like really good long-term data showing that people that were on this peptide semaglutide, they were able to stick to their diets and maintain their metabolic health and weight loss because of that. I don't know if I use the term GLP agonist correctly, but you mentioned it does affect the GLP process. Would people see also effects then with taking this probiotic in terms of satiety or craving control?
Yeah, we definitely see. Well, first of all, funny thing is, our chief medical officer, who's practically one of the founders, was previously the chief medical officer at Amylin Pharmaceuticals. They created the world's first GLP analog. So he was the guy who created these drugs. That company sold to BMS for like $7 billion or something crazy. He was retired, and I met with him and I said, hey, the next big way to improve GLP-1s is not going to be through drugs, it's going to be through the microbiome. And if you want to build the next category of products, what about building kind of these safe, natural ones? And really pulled him in, and he was intrigued by that. And so our whole thing has been about, can you increase GLP-1s? And we actually have data to show that when you give this particular strain, Akkermansia, you can increase GLP-1 production. And it's all natural, right? These are strains that
Wow.
you have in your gut that people are sort of just losing. So we're just giving them back. And so I think that is probably the most interesting and compelling thing. But what people feel on the other side of that, when you are able to metabolize your glucose better, we get people reporting lowered A1C and lowered blood glucose spikes for sure. But what's been interesting to us is we also get people reporting improved digestion, like, oh, now I can eat all these foods that I used to not be able to eat. And by the way, I also have sustained energy throughout the day. I have reduced brain fog. 60% of our customers have reduced sugar cravings. They're not on the product for anything else but the reduced sugar cravings, because
Wow.
these systems are all linked to each other. So as your body is metabolizing food better, and as your GLP-1 production is more regulated, you do have improved satiety, you do have weight loss, you do have these behavioral changes that become part of this positive cycle, and then you start to see more and more good things happening for your metabolism. And so it's been amazing to see that. When we did our trials, we didn't even think to look at satiety, but that's one of the big outcomes that people are reporting back to us after being on the product.
Yeah, so neat. Okay, wow, that's amazing. For anyone that's listening, they're like, this sounds too good to be true. How long, and everyone, I just want, of course, there's that bio individuality and everyone's different, but just in general, I mean, what have you seen? Like, how long would it take someone to be on this supplement where they'd start to see some good changes and like, yeah, man, my cravings are like down and I feel, things are changing?
Well, as you said, it's different for every person. And, you can see people who see a change within days, and then for some people, it takes a lot longer. I think that it's reasonable to expect it to take a few months. And the reason I say that is because you have an already existing microbiome ecosystem, and we're just trying to introduce something new into it. So everybody's already got a spot, and we're trying to bring something new into it, and so that takes some out competition to happen. And so I think that so there's a few things. So first, we know that if you undergo a diet change, it takes about 8 weeks for your microbiome to completely change. We know that for A1C, the hemoglobin cells, it's a 90-day process to replenish your hemoglobin cells. And so right here, you're looking at 2 to 3 months. And now you're trying to introduce kind of a new strain into your microbiome. And so, and you're trying to get that thing to grow and then behave, perform these activities. And so in general, we tell people to give it at least 90 days. Take this 90-day challenge, do it for 3 months, and that's when you should start to hopefully see a change. Some people don't see it until 6 months later. Some people see it like 3 days later. They're like, oh my gosh, my fasting glucose has gone down. So, but I generally think, 90 days is a good amount of time to give yourself for a microbiome change.
I love that. I remember when I first started lifting weights when I was 18. I just turned 40. When I was lifting weights in the gym when I was 18 and going to the gym, and people started to notice. And then I remember I had a friend who he wanted to start lifting weights, and he's like, I want to get, I'm not huge, but he goes, I want to get big like you, Joel. I go, great. You're going to have to wait at least 3 months before you see any actual, like, you'll actually see maybe a little muscle like developing. He's like, you're kidding me. I go, no. And I remember even he got actually way bigger than me. And he goes, you know what? You were right. Like, I didn't see anything in 3 months. And so I love that you said that, because people, we love that immediate gratification. And you may not see anything for 3 months, but just stay the course and you probably see some good results.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's something magical about that kind of 90-day period.
Yeah, and then what's also interesting is I got a chance to talk to Dr. Lemke, who wrote Dopamine Nation, and she was telling me that in order to reset dopamine pathways, it takes 4 weeks, like minimum, just to actually reset those neural pathways. And I would be curious too, because we know that gut-brain connection, that I'm sure plays a role in it too. And I think so people need to manage their expectations, and there's probably a lot going on. So that'd be interesting as well if there's any connection there.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're not doing that work right now, but there's a lot of data coming out showing that there are microbes that increase dopamine, serotonin, all these super important neurotransmitters. And yeah, the issue is really, are people going to give it enough time and be able to get past this need for instant gratification?
Yeah. Okay. Amazing things that it does. What happens though if I stop taking it? Like, will I still see will I reap some of the benefits if I stop taking it after a while?
Well, I'm going to give you the terrible answer of it depends.
Yeah.
We definitely have customers that stop taking it and they see their A1C go back up and then they get back on and of course they're like, I'm never going to stop taking this. When it comes to digestion, most people can feel that sooner than 3 months, and so a lot of people go off and they realize, my digestive system is off. Um, in terms of the strains colonizing, we did a study where we had people on the product for 90 days and then they did a 30-day washout where they weren't taking the pills anymore. And then we looked to see, like, do you still have the strains after that washout period? And what we found is that for most people, they were gone. But about 15 to 20% of people still had the strains in their gut microbiomes, even though they weren't taking the pills anymore. And
Wow.
that's really interesting. And we don't really understand why those individuals were able to sustain the strains, but one could imagine that it could be through a dietary change. So, if you started to increase your intake of fibers or polyphenols and things like that, which feed your microbiome, you could be feeding those strains and not need to take the strains anymore. And so, if you were able to kind of sustain a dietary change, that would be one way in which you could get the strains to colonize.
Yeah, and that leads to my next question, because I'm sure everyone wants to know this. Can I just eat a crappy diet and take your probiotic so I can eat as much junk food as I want and still have a great A1C?
As somebody who decided a long time ago that health is the way I want to make a difference, of course, I cannot say with any good conscience that you can eat whatever you want to. But I will say this, which is that, you know, it's I think it's important to have a little bit of vice. Nobody can be a perfect angel all the time. And I have my own vices, one of which is like our Saturday donut run. And
Nice.
so I
We
think
do
that
something very similar, Colleen. I love that. I have two young boys, and that's important. And I tell my clients too. I just want to say, I always tell my clients, like, I think you need to have that balance. Unless you're like some MMA athlete or some professional training, I can understand why those those certain periods, but this balance, it's so necessary. And like, I'm not going to miss out on these opportunities to connect with my kids because dad's not eating a donut again. Like, come on, it's ridiculous.
Exactly. There's something very social, especially with your kids, about how we, connect with them. And I think as long as you feel like you're doing something to counter that. And that's really what this is about. When you eat sugars, your body has to be able to metabolize those. And all you're doing is you're saying, okay, I'm going to give myself a microbiome that helps me metabolize those sugars. So that, not so that you can eat sugars all day long and all night, but just to, feel like you're helping your body metabolize them better when you do.
Yeah, very cool. And then you have three different products, and even when I'm looking at, it, I'm like, and luckily you do have a quiz, which I didn't take, but you do have a quiz. But I was just curious, like, how do I decide which one's right for me? Because they all seem a little bit similar but different, other than the gut repair one.
Yeah, I think, well, first I'll start by saying we are all in exploratory phase when it comes to the gut microbiome. And these are entirely new strains that have never, really been on the market before. And as I said before, what we're finding is that people are getting benefits that we didn't even study or know about because we're still learning how the microbiome is networked with the rest of your body's systems. And so, pendulum glucose control is if you have diabetes or pre-diabetes or it runs in your family and you're worried about that, that's sort of a clinical strength probiotic to reduce A1C and blood glucose spikes. It does have these other things like people are reporting back, reduced sugar cravings and improved digestion and better energy. Akkermansia, we didn't really talk very much about this strain, but this strain is plays a very unique role compared to any other strain that's out there. Um, and maybe I think about it like your gut lining is a fence. So like I have a wooden fence in my backyard. When I first moved in here, our wooden fence was brand new. All the planks are really strong. The glue between them was really strong. But for anybody who has a wooden fence, you know that over time, through wear and tear and weather and seasons, that fence can start to get weakened, and the glue between them can start to, get weaker, and even a plank could fall. And when that happens, all of a sudden you've got a real problem here. And so your gut lining is like a fence. It's like a fence in that it has literally these kinds of planks in it, and they have to be maintained strong. And one of the things that happens for people over time is that those planks start to wear down, and their gut lining gets thin, and they have so-called leaky gut and things like that. Akkermansia is the only strain on the market that literally lives in the gut lining, and its job is to stand there at that fence and repair it all day long and all night. And so when you start to get low in Akkermansia, it shows up in all these different ways. It's not just when you have metabolic issues and GI issues, but it's also heightened inflammatory responses, reduced immune responses. It's basically all the things that that fence is supposed to be doing when you don't have it there. All these things sort of fall apart in these other systems. And so Akkermansia is this really important key strain that is just emerging as this keystone strain because it lives at the gut lining and repairs that fence all day and all night. And so Akkermansia is something that people come to for a variety of reasons. We have on there it's for gut health, but we have, for example, a small and growing number of people that are using it for eczema because underneath it all, eczema is really an inflammatory issue, not a skin issue. I think of it as funny, like if you're, it's like you're in your car and the check engine light comes on and you put a piece of tape over it and you're like, well, I solved that problem. That's kind of what we do with eczema and acne, like we're just solving it at the surface rather than getting into the engine and actually solving the problem. So Akkermansia really has a variety of roles. And then the third one, GI repair, as you said, that one's relatively straightforward. It's to help repair your gut and improve things mostly around gas and bloating.
Yeah. Okay. Um, a couple questions about. I'm just thinking about this. Well, actually, real quick, how does blood glucose? How does that blood glucose control probiotic? How does that compare to metformin in terms of results?
From a regulatory standpoint, I have to give the disclaimer that this is not intended to replace any therapeutic drug that anybody is on. But if you were to look at the data out there of how much A1C and blood glucose spikes go down, you would see that pendulum glucose control is on par with the key diabetes drugs out there, including everybody's favorite metformin and also including even these GLP-1s.
You just made me so happy. Colleen, one of my secret missions, one of my biggest missions is putting a health coach in every home by teaching them the principles of health. But my second mission is to make Big Pharma go broke. So you are totally aligning with me, and I'm going to promote the heck out of your product because now you just told me that. So thank you so much. The other thing, actually, this is what I want to ask you. This is huge, the Acromantia, because we know, like you said, with immunity and the gut lining, when the gut integrity gets open, these proteins leak into the bloodstream, and then your body starts to not recognize these proteins, starts to attack it, and we get this thing called autoimmune disease. So I would imagine that Acromantia is going to be huge with people with autoimmune issues.
Absolutely. And interestingly, it's been found with some people that have autoimmune issues, their body is actually increasing the production of this strain or trying to increase the production of this strain. And so, in some ways, the body has its own feedback loop, which says like, oh, I've got a problem. How do I help rectify it? And so, we haven't done any studies in autoimmune disorders, but I think there's a huge opportunity there. And I just on the pharma note, it's funny. I mean, I have a PhD in biochemistry and molecular biology from Johns Hopkins. I did a pretty traditional postdoc at Northwestern, and then I did what everybody does after that, which is like I went and I worked in pharma. So I cut my teeth in pharma. We were developing drugs for Parkinson's disease. And I can tell you, as someone who's like a former pharma person, all you think about in a pharmaceutical company is efficacy. Does a thing work? Does a thing work? You don't actually think about the person who's going to be using the product, which is why you come up with products like, oh, you just simply inject this in your stomach 3 times a day and you're good to go. Like, who would ever come up with that if they were thinking about the person who has to use it on the other side? And then you wonder, like, why is compliance so terrible? And why are people, trying to figure things out on their own and not necessarily going to their doctor for help? And so I feel like one of the big epiphanies that I've had in my career is if you think about the person who's actually going to use the product first, efficacy, of course, is going to be a part of that. But if you think about that first, you can actually change health. And my goal is to change health. And if you're not thinking about that person who's going to use this and their life and how's this thing going to integrate into their life and what's going to make them feel good about what they're doing, you're never going to win the health battle. And so I have squarely moved off of you have to use drugs to do this to there's a lot of other ways to do this. And that's, for me, the big opportunity of the microbiome.
Yeah, so huge. I love that's amazing. Yeah, it was just reminding me of Simon Sinek talks about, he has his one of his latest book is called The Infinite Game. And he talks about what you just said is like a lot of corporations and companies, just from that level of management, they have forgotten the person and like remembering who it is that they're serving. And I love that you said that. That's so huge, which is what I think is what separates your company. And there's reasons why you guys are doing well and you're being disruptive in a good way. So a couple more questions and we'll wrap things up. I wanted to ask you about butyrate and why is that important? Because I know in the GI repair product, I believe, that is what that specifically, it upregulates butyrate. And I remember talking to Dr. Scott Schur. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him. He's a pretty well-known guy. And one of the things he told me in passing was, Joel, I have to actually actively raise a lot of my clients' butyrate levels in the gut, and they're significantly diminished. And he told me this a couple of years ago, so it was on his mind. Why is butyrate so important?
Yeah, butyrate is, interestingly, the colon cells are the only cells in the body that use butyrate as their source of energy. Every other cell in your body uses sugar, uses glucose, and the colon uses butyrate. And so when people are low in butyrate, it's related to all of these GI, it starts to show up in all these GI issues, including colorectal diseases. And then we also know that butyrate, as I said, it's upstream. It stimulates GLP-1, and so we know it's important for metabolism. And so I think that there is a lot of evidence that butyrate is important for a wide variety of these diseases, and it hasn't always been clear what are the strains that you can deliver that will actually naturally increase butyrate levels. And so I think that that's a really important part of the discovery. And this GI repair product, which is Clostridium butyricum, it's named butyricum because it produces butyrate, is one way to increase the butyrate levels and kind of improve your colon health.
Very cool. Okay, nice. All right. Any exciting projects you guys are doing so much, but any other exciting projects that you guys are working on right now?
We are very excited about a couple of things that we're going to be releasing coming up. So before the end of this year, we are going to be releasing polyphenols, and this is a polyphenol formulation that we created based on wanting to increase akkermansia. And so in the lab, we looked at a wide variety of polyphenols, and we were looking for ones that interacted well with akkermansia. And so what we're going to be offering is polyphenols that specifically contain these extracts. So it's pomegranate, grapeseed, and to really help bolster akkermansia levels in the gut. And then next year, we're going to be releasing a product which is to improve metabolic health, but it's not specifically designed for people with diabetes and prediabetes. So the question that you asked early on, which is, hey, what if I don't have these diseases? Can I still take the product? And I said to you, well, you should be worried about these strains and making sure that you have maintenance going on, which, by the way, a pharmaceutical company can never really go after. That's going to be a product that is going to be a lot less expensive because it costs a lot to create this clinical grade product. It's going to be a lot less expensive, but it's going to have all of the components that are going to help people maintain their metabolic health through these same pathways of improving GLP-1 and helping produce butyrate.
Very neat. Very cool. I want to jump into some lightning round questions, but then just before I do it, is there anything that I didn't ask you that you wish I had?
Maybe I'll just say that one of the things that I get asked a lot is, gee, how come these probiotics are so expensive?
Oh boy.
And
I'm glad you brought this up because my mom, who listens to the podcast, would be asking me, Joel, you didn't ask her what the cost was. I want to know what the cost is. So
yes, let's get right to the elephant in the room.
yes.
Why are they so expensive? We are not just trying to like fleece people or whatever other nefarious things that people can come up with. Identifying these strains and isolating them was, first of all, a really expensive endeavor. There's a reason why there are no new probiotics, is because it costs a lot of money to go out and develop something innovative and new. And then the second thing is manufacturing these strains is actually really challenging. So this is something that most people don't know, which is that in your microbiome, there's actually no oxygen. So there's oxygen in your stomach, there's oxygen in parts of your colon, but by the time you get to the microbiome, which is where all this action is happening, there's no oxygen. And what that means is that if you want to grow these strains, you have to create a manufacturing plant that end to end keeps all oxygen molecules out. So we ended up having to build our own manufacturing plant and grow these strains in a way that there's no oxygen in the manufacturing system, and that's really expensive. And so that's why the product's expensive. And in fact, hopefully none of my investors is listening to this, but in the first 6 months we released product, we were actually losing money every time we sold a bottle because of how expensive it was to make the product. And so as we make strides, we also pass those savings along to our customers. So literally, last quarter, we had a big improvement in our manufacturing, and we actually lowered the price of akkermansia during a time in which inflation has been going crazy and people have been raising prices. We have been lowering them. And so I think that all of us to say is like, when you join us, you're on a journey to discover this new microbiome field, and we're learning together. And as you buy our product and you help us figure these things out, we're going to be able to lower the price and together figure this thing out together. And so all I would say to people is, if you want to be a part of innovation and you want to be a part of products that are actually game changing for your health, please join us. It's expensive because it costs us a lot to make the product, but as we figure this out, we're going to pass that along to you.
I love that. Yeah, you guys need like some kind of hashtag or slogan for it's because like symbiosis, like it's that gut harmony, right? We're all working together, and that's what it's all about. So, people that are supporting you guys, you're making them better, and they're making you guys better. They're supporting that cause, so that's really cool.
Thank
All
you.
right, let's jump into some lightning round questions. Colleen, I'm curious, what are some choices or just maybe a choice that you made that you think made you who you are today?
I think actually having no plan is helpful in some ways. So when I was finishing up college, I actually didn't know what I was going to do. A lot of my friends went into investment banking and management consulting, and it all sounded very glamorous. And I just didn't know. And I had a professor call me in her office, and she said, "What are you going to do when you graduate?" And I said, "I don't know." I just gave the answer that I gave to you. I said, "I'm probably going to go back and live at home and figure it out." After she finished rolling her eyes, she said, "Well, have you thought about going to graduate school?" And I said, "No, I haven't really thought about that." And she gave me some brochures, and she said, "Well, you should think about it. Like, I was a biochemistry major. Like, you should think about going to graduate school and really becoming an expert in the field. And, here's how you apply. And I remember I had this conversation in November. All the applications were due by December. And this is like, go take a standardized test, write these application, forms, get teacher recommendation letters, all this stuff. And I just kind of thought, like, why not? Sure. And I did it. And I ended up going to Johns Hopkins, and that transformed my whole life. I always thought of science as these things where you have to like memorize stuff and regurgitate, and it's not really very creative. And what I learned in graduate school is that science is about understanding how the world around you operates and then figuring out how you can change it to make it better. And you can't figure out how to change it to make it better until you've gone through the years of learning how it works. And that's why there's so much learning involved before you can make a change. And so that is when I decided, oh my gosh, health is how I want to make an impact on the world. This is actually a very creative field. There's a lot to discover and uncover and figure out. And it was all because this one professor said, why don't you try it? And I said, sure, why not? That sounds as good as anything else.
I can totally relate. When I was 18, I had no idea. All my friends were going to Stanford, Berkeley, Davis, UCLA. I had no idea what I wanted to do, and I think that some of that self-discovery phase was really good for me to kind of take that pause. So yeah, and having good mentors, like you said, to lead me along the way. Speaking of mentors, I'm curious, you guys are doing such amazing work in the health and wellness world. Who inspires you, or anybody that you follow, or any of their work?
Um, Yeah, I mean, I think that it's interesting because the whole kind of integrative and functional medicine world, I think, used to be a much smaller group, and now is becoming much more embraced as people start to realize some of the detriments of small molecule drugs. But I would say that for me personally, the people that inspire me are entrepreneurs. Like, it's pretty hard to just decide to go start a company, and there's almost like a complete naive innocence to it that makes people who do that both lunatics as well as really inspirational. And so I love anybody who's decided, like, I'm on a safe path, but I'm gonna see what this track looks like and really just go out and try it. And you're one such person too, like being on a path that feels safe and you kind of see what the track looks like ahead and then deciding to go do something different. I mean, I'm inspired by you and your story. It's hard to do something like that.
One of my mentors. Okay, so I had a 9 to 5 job for 15 years. I just quit last year and launched this coaching business and the podcast I'd been doing, but now I can double down on even more. But he said entrepreneurs, just so you guys know, they are batshit crazy. He's like, and you have to be crazy. He's like, because think about it, it's a roller coaster ride. It's never a linear growth. You never just you just keep stacking wins. Like, there's good day when you have those highs, they're the highest of the highs. But when you have the lows, man, they hurt. And it's the ability to consistently get up and show up day in and day out. I think, and I love that you said that. That's so true.
Well, and
We'll
maybe I
wrap.
would just add to that,
Yeah.
anybody can be an entrepreneur. The truth is, anybody can be an entrepreneur, and it just requires you to be able to close your eyes to some of the hard things and keep your eye on the big vision. And many people do entrepreneurial work without even knowing it. So, for example, if you've ever had a child, you have done something very entrepreneurial. You took a leap of faith. You had no idea what this is going to be like, but you have a vision for this person that you want to create who's going to make a difference in the future world that you're not going to be a part of. And they're terrible. Children are terrible people. They ruin your life. They ruin your day. All day long they do this. But you ignore that. At night, when you see their beautiful sleeping faces, you forget all the terrible things they did all day long, and you just remember that vision. And you are an entrepreneur. If you've ever experienced this or gone through this with a child, it's literally the same thing.
So true. My wife homeschools our boys and takes care of them, and she does 20 times the amount of work that I do. So yeah, I couldn't agree more. I'm a big reader. Any books that you'd recommend that had a huge impact on your life? Is there a top 1 to 3? You don't have to. I mean, there's sure I have many, but maybe there's just 1 or 3 that stand out for you.
My top book is going to be one no one is ever going to read. But I'll tell you one that people might actually read. So one of my favorite books is actually How to Manage Scientists, and the reason that book is so important is because Scientists and engineers have a very particular type of mind. It is very creative, but it's very hard oftentimes to have that kind of a mind and then also be able to articulate what it is that you're doing. But one of the most important things that you can do when you've created something wonderful is to be able to express to other people what it is that you've made. And being able to manage people who have that particular challenge with this genius on the other side, I think is a very important skill that not very many people have. And so I would love for people to really dig into and learn, how do I manage, how do I grow scientists and engineers to be better communicators so that the world can really reap all of their benefits and not kind of think it's this weird behind the curtain thing that's happening. Um, but the second book that has really sort of shaped me as a manager and leader was one that was recommended to me by one of my first managers. He said, Colleen, when you first become a manager, one of the most important books you can read is called Siblings Without Rivalry. Go buy it and read it and let's talk about it. So I went online, I looked for this book, Siblings Without Rivalry, and I was like, this is a child raising book. This is a book about raising kids and having siblings that don't fight with each other. So I called him back. I said, is this really the book? This is a child, like I didn't even have kids at the time when I got
Yeah.
recommended this book. And he said, that's the book. Go read it. And the whole premise of the book is children are always looking to you as their parent to be telling them that they're the favorite. And so the reason you have sibling rivalry is that one kid is always trying to be the favored kid in the parent's eye. And as a manager, not that, your employees are children, but that it's the same emotion. People always want to be the favorite employee. I want to be the favorite employee. I want to be the one that gets your attention. I want to be the one that gets your time. And when I have conflict with someone else, I want to come to you to help me solve it. And the whole premise of this book is, how do you enable people to solve problems amongst themselves without needing you to be the person who comes in and solves it for them? And it's a very powerful tool on how to be a leader that creates leaders of the future.
That is so good. Okay, I've never heard of that book. I'm definitely going to grab that. And as a dad, I could definitely use some
It'll
extra
also help there.
tips. Yeah. Last two questions. We'll wrap it up. Any rituals or hacks or practices that you do on a regular basis? Some people do cold plunges now or gratitude journaling. What are you doing?
I think, many people have started to, I'm not alone in this, understand the benefits of kind of prolonged periods of not eating. It's called intermittent fasting. That's not the part that's that interesting to me. A lot of people are doing it. It is great. It has a bunch of benefits that are undeniable. What's important to me is that people know at the end of your fasting period, when you have your breakfast or your break fast, the first thing you put into your body is probably the most important thing that you should think about. And this comes back to the microbiome. You've been depleting your microbiome for however number of hours, and now everybody's sitting there kind of on an evil level playing field. And what you choose to put into your body is what's going to feed the good microbes. And so starting that first meal with things that are high in fiber, high in prebiotics, the Pendulum probiotics are the first thing that I take along with high fiber. That is the thing that is going to jumpstart your microbiome and really feed those good bacteria. And so think about that first thing you put into your body.
For me, it's coffee, and then more coffee. Does that do anything? It's got polyphenols in it, right?
It's got polyphenols in it, so we'll go with that. Yes.
Okay, cool. All right, last but not least, Colleen Cutcliffe, where can people find you and connect more with what your team and you guys are doing over at Pendulum Health?
So you can find us on our website, pendulumlife.com, and that's where you can learn we have a lot of information out there about our trials and about how these products work. You can also buy us on Amazon. So if you like buying things on Amazon, which everybody does, you can also purchase us there. Just look up, Pendulum Probiotics, and you should be able to pull us up there. And then I also wanted to say that for all of your listeners today, if they go onto our website, pendulumlife.com, and purchase membership, they'll get 20% off of their first membership by using the word hacked. And so that's how
Love that.
they
Thank you.
Yes, get a jump start.
That's amazing. Colleen Cutcliffe from Pendulum Life, thank you so much for being on the show. We appreciate you.
Thank you so much for having me.